There was no grand moment, no speech, no perfectly crafted final message that landed exactly right, no strategic withdrawal executed with clinical precision. You did not play it cool because you had a plan. You did not disappear because someone told you that disappearing would work. You simply responded to being rejected by an avoidant the way someone does when they have finally, quietly, completely run out of willingness to negotiate with their own worth. You handled it with dignity, not performance of dignity, not dignity as a tactic, the real kind. The kind that arrives when there is nothing left to lose, and the only thing remaining is the choice of how you carry yourself out of something that cost you more than they will ever fully know. And that specific thing, the way you left, the way you absorbed the rejection without dissolving, the way you did not make them pay for it or beg them to reconsider, or hand them yet another version of your heart to do nothing with. That is the thing that got inside them in a way that nothing that came before it managed to. Here is the psychological reality of what happens when someone handles rejection with genuine dignity. The avoidant, in the moment of rejecting someone, is operating from a defended place. The decision to pull back, to create distance, to end things or make ending things inevitable, that decision is made from behind the wall. It is the defense system executing its primary function. Keep intimacy at a manageable distance, protect the interior, maintain control over how close things get before they become threatening. And the defense system, when it executes that function, anticipates a specific response. It anticipates pursuit, or collapse, or anger, or some combination of all three, delivered in a series of messages or conversations that the avoidant can then use to confirm the narrative they built to justify the distance. Too much, too intense. See, this is exactly why I needed space. When you did not give them that response, something in the architecture of the rejection shifted. Dignity in the face of rejection communicates something that the avoidance defense system has no established protocol for. It communicates that you are someone who exists completely outside of their decision about you, that your sense of self did not hinge on their choice, that your worth was not located in their willingness to stay, that you were, before them and through them and after them, a whole person whose wholeness was never actually in their hands to grant or revoke. That communication does not arrive in words. It arrives in the absence of the behaviours the avoidant was bracing for. In the silence where the pursuit was supposed to be. In the stillness where the collapse was supposed to land. In the quiet, unperformed, completely genuine way you took yourself and your dignity and your love and walked. The avoidance nervous system, having anticipated one thing and encountered another, does something it almost never does voluntarily. It pays attention. Not to your absence exactly, to what your absence reveals about the presence they just refused. Because the way someone leaves tells you something about who they were that the entire relationship, with all its complexity and negotiation, sometimes obscures. And the specific way you left, without drama, without punishment, without making them responsible for your disintegration, told the avoidant something they could not unhear, that you were real and more solid than the defense system had been willing to acknowledge while you were still close enough to feel threatening. There is a specific thing that happens inside an avoidant when they realize the person they rejected did not need them to survive the rejection. It reorders the narrative. The avoidance exit narrative, the internal story constructed to make the distance feel justified and reasonable, requires a particular version of you. It requires the version that confirms their fears about intimacy, the version that is too needy, too intense, too much, too dependent on the relationship for their own stability. That version of you gave the avoidance defense system something to point at. See? This is why it was right to pull back. This is what closeness costs. But the version of you that handled rejection with dignity does not fit that narrative. It does not confirm the fear. It does not give the defense system anything to use. It presents instead a person who was capable of loving deeply without losing themselves. A person who wanted the relationship without requiring it for basic functioning. A person who, it turns out, was never the problem the narrative needed them to be. And a narrative that loses its evidence does not hold. This is where the falling happens. Not immediately, not dramatically, but in the slow, quiet, disorienting process of a story falling apart. Because the avoidant is now left with two things that do not reconcile. The decision they made, which felt necessary and self-protective and right, and the evidence of who you actually were, delivered in the specific way you absorbed their rejection and still walked out with your head level. These two things cannot coexist comfortably. The decision requires you to have been one kind of person. The evidence confirms you were another. And the gap between those two versions of you becomes a space the avoidant cannot stop returning to in their own mind, turning over and examining from different angles, trying to find the version of events that makes their decision feel clean. It never quite gets there. What develops, over time, in that unresolvable gap, is something that operates below the level of conscious choice. It is a specific quality of longing that is not just about missing you. It is about missing the version of themselves that existed in proximity to someone who saw them clearly and loved them anyway. Who absorbed genuine pain, the pain of being rejected by someone they genuinely wanted, and came through it without turning that pain into a weapon. That quality, absorbing pain without weaponizing it, is extraordinarily rare. Most people, when hurt, either collapse or retaliate. The collapse confirms certain fears. The retaliation confirms others. Both give the avoidance defense system something to work with, something to point at, some way of maintaining the narrative that distance was the right call. You did neither. You just left clean. And clean departures from people who mattered do not stop echoing. What I want to be careful about here is the implication that this is something you did for them. It was not, or it should not have been. The dignity you brought to the way you handled their rejection was not a performance calibrated to produce a specific reaction. It was the natural result of having finally, completely, arrived at the decision that you were no longer available to make yourself smaller, in the hope that being smaller would make them more willing to stay. It was what happens when someone has exhausted every other option and arrives, almost by process of elimination, at self-respect. The fact that it moved them is not the point. The point is what it meant for you. That in one of the most painful moments of the entire dynamic, you chose yourself. Not dramatically, not with a declaration, just quietly and completely and without apology. That choice is the thing they fell in love with. Not a tactic, not a move, not a version of you that was carefully constructed to be maximally appealing to someone running from intimacy. The version of you that had been there the entire time, underneath all the adjusting and accommodating and careful management of how much of yourself you revealed at any given moment. The version that did not need their validation to know its own worth. The version that could be rejected and still remain, fundamentally and without performance, whole. That version does not need to engineer being loved. It simply needs to be encountered. And in the specific, quiet, undramatic way you handled what they did, they encountered it fully, possibly for the first time. Certainly in a way they will not forget.